The reality is that we are moving very, very rapidly from a print-dominated industry or a print broadcast or a traditional platform-dominated industry to a digital industry, and that there is going to be an inflection point where we need to think in terms of what our core platforms are. Very, very soon, the New York Times, and actually perhaps as soon as next year, the New York Times will have more digital subscribers than we have print subscribers for the first time. And when that happens, you start to think, well, what does that mean for the way we produce a newspaper every day? What does that mean for the way we produce our website every day, or our apps, or our other digital products that we're building right now? It has enormous implications across the entire organization, and that's what we need to be thinking about. Well, first and foremost, period, they need to be solid writers. They need to be able to turn a phrase. They need to be able to do the basics of journalism. They need to know how to conduct an interview. They need to know the basics of journalism, fundamentally, period, end of story. Beyond that, I always tell journalism students who ask me this question that they have to be comfortable, very comfortable with the digital media in general, and probably an expert in at least one digital platform. So that could be, these days, that could be almost anything from video to audio to programming to data visualization. We even have a person in the newsroom right now who does 3D motion graphics. These are not people that you found in a newsroom 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So I would say they need to have at least one thing that they are passionate about, one platform that they have absolutely mastered, something that they are really, really good at, and then a fairly comprehensive knowledge about multimedia, about digital media generally. But bottom line is they need to be excellent, excellent journalists. I'm not seeing this massive sea change of journalists who are getting the skills necessary to do this. Well, maybe that's wrong. I actually am seeing more than I ever have. I mean, like this particular event, right? This, where I am today, this would not have happened 3 years ago. Especially in Europe, actually, because of the work of the EJC and some of the other organizations that have been, the Open Knowledge Foundation, some of the other organizations that have been deeply committed to helping transform journalism, open data, civic hackers. I mean, you've seen I think a lot of movement in this area. So I think we're seeing two things. One, I think we're seeing more journalists, not nearly as many as we need to see, but more journalists who are moving in this direction. That's good. I think we're seeing a lot of people from outside journalism entering journalism, being interested in coming into a newsroom. That I think is the most important trend. Right now, I think business models fundamentally, well, two things. Analytics and business models. These are the two things I'm incredibly passionate about right now. Trying to understand how journalism in a digital environment, how stories should be told, how we need to change the way we tell stories, what tools, technologies, what platforms we need to embrace in order to tell those stories, how we can engage at scale with readers in ways that were impossible in sort of traditional media. On the web, you can actually have something like an interaction with thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of readers, if done right. And I think we need to learn a lot from the fields of marketing, from advertising, even from political organizing, political campaigns. There's a lot to learn from these fields that have actually looked at these problems and studied them and in some cases even solved them. So business models and analytics, understanding who our readers are, understanding how they want to engage with news, all of these things are critical. And I will say, these are things that, for the most part, news organizations are incredibly bad at. So this is This is where I think academia, for the first time in my professional career, I actually don't know if this is true of Europe, but I will say for the US, for the first time in my entire professional career, which is now like 20 years, academia has the ability, if it desires to actually lead the industry in innovation, if it desires to. Hasn't happened yet, but the potential is there, and it's actually pretty exciting. I mean, there's different flavors of a paywall, and I think we need to also take a step back. What is a paywall? A paywall is a very short-term solution to a very long-term problem. It's simply saying to your most loyal readers in digital form, you now are going to have to pay for that which once was free. And you know, the Times has created a paywall. It has been very successful within the scope of our definition of success. However, it is not attracting new readers. By definition, it's actually chasing away potential new readers. And so paywall is only one step. I have, you know, over the years, I've had sort of mixed feelings about paywalls. You know, the sort of open source, my sort of open source, you know, hacker sort of sensibilities says this information is important and it should be freely available. And I think that in some ways, actually, the New York Times, I think, has struck a pretty good balance there, where if you come from Twitter or search or whatever, you will get the article. You do get 10 articles a month. You can actually, we are participating in the open web to a degree. On the other hand, you know, the idea that news will simply magically fall from the sky, that a 2-year investigation that uncovers, you know, this incredible amount of corruption or scandalous behavior, that a 2-year investigation is just going to somehow magically appear if, you know, you open up the web and make free tools available. That's just totally naive. Somebody has to pay for that. That has to get supported somehow. That could come through government, that could come through university, or that can come through the commercial sector. There's nothing that says it can't come from somewhere else. In the current form, it's mostly coming from the commercial sector. Some from nonprofit, but mostly the commercial sector. Someone has to pay, and I don't have any particular problem asking people to pay. What's the right mix of premium versus non-premium? You know, everyone does it differently. I think the Times actually has got it right. The Times says you can always find content that's linked to from somewhere else. You can always find content that's linked to from social media. You can always find content that's linked to from search. You get a certain amount of, you can always see what's on the homepage. You can always scan what's in the apps. At a certain point, though, we ask you to support the journalism that we do. I think that's a pretty good balance, but I want to stress, paywalls are a very short-term solution to a much longer-term problem. Well, I mean, in the US, there's a very specific problem, and that is that there is no shield law in place that protects a reporter from having to divulge, or the news organization, which is the bigger problem, that legally protects them from having to divulge their sources. So the tradition has been that prosecutors, federal prosecutors, have only in very, very limited circumstances actually gone to a news organization and subpoenaed a reporter and said, no, you have to testify and you have to tell us who your source is. Or have gone to the news organization and said, I want all the email, I want all the data, I want all of, you know, the notes that the reporter has taken. That's happened before. And that changed under the Bush administration, and it continues under the Obama administration. I totally agree with Paul. I think there is a frightening level of over-aggressiveness on the part of the administration right now to clamp down on leakers and whistleblowers. So to some degree, no, to a great degree, I have a sort of mixed feelings about WikiLeaks as an organization. The concept I completely support. I believe there needs to be, and there can be, intermediaries like WikiLeaks out there who can take information, take leaks, and then anonymize that information and make that available to whomever. It could be a journalist, it could be the general public. In fact, that was WikiLeaks' initial mission. That's what they were created for. And it was only with the leak of the video of the helicopter and then the subsequent leaks, that's when the organization, I think, went a little bit off the rails, and it became a little more about Julian Assange than it did about the original mission. That's the problem I have with WikiLeaks. But conceptually, I believe this is an incredibly important development for journalism, not just in the US, by the way, but around the world, where as bad as things are in the US, in terms of protections for whistleblowers and leakers, in some ways it's even worse in other parts of the world, much worse. So to me, the way we need to go is we need to find organizations like WikiLeaks, but who are more, I would say, neutral in this, who can broker those kinds of relationships. And there are a few of them out there, but they haven't so far reached the scale of WikiLeaks. I don't think so. I do think, I mean, it's, if you look at the latest, the Pew Center in the US does research on readership, newspaper readership, news readership, and consumption patterns. And they've been looking at social media trends for a long, long time. And they just released a report not that long ago that showed that something, I'm blanking on the exact number, but it was a relatively large percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds who received their news exclusively, not largely, but exclusively through social media. And so, you know, I think a lot of journalists read that and panic, and they can't believe that, like, what are we gonna do? I actually don't see that as a problem at all. Since that news originally has to come from somewhere. I don't care if someone comes to a piece of news through Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, you name it. I don't care. Email, smoke signals. I don't really care. All I care about is that information gets to people and that they receive it. What we're seeing lately, which is I think a really interesting development, is Twitter is hiring a lot of journalists, so is Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's even talking about Facebook as essentially a newspaper. I mean, part of their product, their sort of product focus is moving toward being sort of a broker of information, not necessarily a source of information, but being a better broker of information, surfacing more important, more meatier content. I think that can only benefit those journalism organizations that understand social media well enough to take advantage of it. The rest of them, I think, are probably going to be hurt more than they're helped by that. But those news organizations that understand social media, who've made that investment, who aren't afraid of it, who can embrace it and utilize it for what it is, the most powerful development in digital distribution in our lifetimes, easily, those are the organizations that are going to win.